The hull breach alarm on Orbital Processing Station, Cathara 7, hit its third sustained tone, the one that meant the emergency was no longer local at 14 minutes past the start of the third shift, and Damage Control Officer Second Class Marcus Hale was already running. He had been running since the first tone. The first had been a contained alert, a standard pressure drop in refinery module Sigma 4, the kind of thing that happened once a quarter on an industrial platform this old. The second tone had changed the math. It meant the breach had spread past one compartment. The third tone meant it was spreading faster than containment could track it. Hale rounded the bend in the central corridor at a dead sprint, his boots hammering the deck plates, and nearly collided with a Vrelani shift supervisor coming the other way. The supervisor was a tall, thin-limbed being with translucent amber skin through which Hale could see the pale green of her circulatory fluid pulsing too fast. Her name was Overseer Thalen, and she was bleeding from a gash across her upper torso where something had struck her. "Sigma 4 is gone," Thalen said. Her voice was a rapid, fluttering whistle that the translator rendered flat. The refinery line ruptured. Pressurized processing fluid, it caught fire when it hit the Atmo recyclers. "How many inside?" 17. The blast doors sealed on auto. I could not override. The fire suppression system, she stopped, and the pale green in her translucent skin darkened. A Vrelani flush response, shame or fear. The suppression system did not engage. Hale processed this in the time it took him to unsling his emergency kit from his shoulder. 17 Vrelani workers sealed inside a burning compartment with no suppression, behind blast doors that had locked on automatic. The Cathara stations were old Vrelani industrial design, and the auto-seal protocols were built with a logic that prioritized the station over the crew. Once the doors locked, the system's calculus was simple. Let the compartment burn itself out, preserve atmosphere for the rest of the platform. The Vrelani had designed it that way. They accepted those losses. It was in their engineering manuals under tolerable attrition. Hale did not find it tolerable. "Show me the nearest access panel to Sigma 4's blast door," he said. Thalen stared at him. Her amber skin had gone nearly transparent with shock, and he could see every vessel in her face pulsing. "The doors are sealed. The system will not allow." "I'm not asking the system. Show me the panel." She showed him. It was 90 meters down the corridor, a maintenance alcove set into the wall beside the massive blast door that separated the burning module from the rest of the station. The door was 3 meters of reinforced composites, and through it Hale could hear the fire, not the roar that was muffled. What he heard was the ticking of the door's thermal sensors, the rhythmic ping that meant the temperature on the other side was climbing past the threshold, where the door's own structure would begin to degrade. He opened the access panel. The Vrelani wiring was different from Terran's standard thinner conductors, crystalline relay nodes instead of circuit boards, but the logic was the same. A sealed circuit held the door locked. Break the circuit, the lock disengaged. The system would fight it. There were 3 redundant lockout layers, each one designed to prevent exactly what Hale was about to do. He pulled his multi-tool from his belt and began cutting. "What are you doing?" Thalen's voice had gone high and thin. "Unsealing the door." "You cannot. The fire will spread too." "Not if we're fast." Hale found the first relay node and cracked it with a precise twist of the multi-tool's pry head. The node split, and a cascade of warning indicators lit up across the panel. "Overseer, I need you to get every person on this deck to the portside corridor. Clear the zone around Sigma 4. I'm going to open this door, go in, and bring out everyone I find. When I come back through, you seal it behind me manually." "Manually," Thalen repeated. "There's a lever on the inside face of the frame. Red handle left side. You pull it, the door drops. Can you do that?" She looked at the door, then at Hale. Her translucent skin was cycling through colors he didn't have names for. "Yes," she said. "Good, get the corridor clear." I need 3 minutes. She ran. Hale watched her go, then turned back to the panel. Second relay node. Third. Each one tripped a new alarm on the station's PA system, a rising shriek of automated warnings in Vrelani that his translator rendered as do not override containment seal atmospheric compromise in progress fire suppression failure confirmed. He overrode the final relay. The blast door shuddered, then began to rise. Heat hit him like a wall. Not the gentle warmth of a Vrelani station running at their preferred 29 degrees Celsius, but the savage, dry heat of an industrial chemical fire burning through processing equipment at temperatures that peeled paint off Durasteel. His exposure suit's thermal layer activated and the heads-up readout in his helmet visor climbed. 62 degrees at the door, 83 2 meters inside, climbing. Hale pulled his rebreather mask over his face, sealed his gloves, and walked into the fire. Sigma 4 was a refinery module, 60 meters long by 40 wide, filled with processing tanks, pipe runs, and conveyor systems for the mineral slurry that Cathara 7 extracted from the asteroid field. Half of it was burning. The fire had started at the main processing line, where a pressurized feed pipe had ruptured and sprayed superheated fluid across the atmospheric recycler bank. The recyclers had ignited. The fire had spread along the pipe runs, following the insulation material, and was now consuming everything on the starboard side of the module. The port side was smoke-filled but not yet burning. That was where the crew would be. Hale moved fast. The smoke was thick and chemical, the kind that would kill a Vrelani in minutes. Their respiratory system was efficient but fragile, designed for the clean, filtered air of their homeworld, not for the toxic stew that an industrial fire produced. He found the first cluster of workers 30 seconds in. 7 of them huddled behind a processing tank that was providing a temporary heat shield. They were on the floor, 3 of them unconscious, the others coughing in short, ragged bursts that meant their lung membranes were already irritated. A Vrelani male, young, his amber skin nearly white with terror, looked up at Hale and said something the translator could not parse through the interference. Hale knelt. "Can you walk?" The young male nodded. 2 others nodded. 3 were down. "Take the ones who can stand and move toward the blast door. It's open. You'll see light from the corridor. Go now." "The others?" "I'll bring them. Go." They went. Hale hauled the first unconscious Vrelani onto his shoulders. She was lighter than he expected. The Vrelani skeletal structure was a lattice of hollow, minerite-dense bones that gave them height but not mass. Maybe 50 kilograms. He carried her to the blast door, set her down in the corridor where Thalen was already organizing a triage line, and went back in. Second unconscious worker. Same route. The heat was worse now. His suit's thermal readout showed 91 degrees and the fire was spreading portside. The processing tank the workers had been hiding behind was starting to glow along its base where the flames were licking up the supports. Third unconscious worker. Hale's arms were burning, not from the heat but from the strain. He set the worker down in the corridor, took 3 breaths of clean air and looked at Thalen. "How many more inside?" 10. They were deeper in, near the secondary processing line. "Where exactly?" Thalen pulled up a station schematic on her wrist console. Her hands were shaking. "Here. The secondary line runs along the dorsal section of the module. There is a service corridor above the main floor. It connects to an observation gallery." "Is the gallery sealed?" "Yes, the gallery has its own atmospheric system. If they made it there, they may still have breathable air." Hale studied the schematic. The observation gallery was a small enclosed space above the refinery floor, accessed by a service ladder at the back of the module. To reach it, he would have to cross the full length of Sigma 4, through the heart of the fire zone. His suit was rated for 120 degrees for 15 minutes. His rebreather had maybe 20 minutes of filtered air left. The fire was still spreading, and without suppression, it would consume the entire module within the hour. "I'm going for them," Hale said. Thalen grabbed his arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong for a species with hollow bones, and her translucent skin was cycling through dark blues and purples that his cultural training told him was something beyond fear. "The fire will reach the dorsal section in 20 minutes, maybe less, I know." He unclipped a spare rebreather cartridge from his kit and snapped it into the secondary port on his mask. "If I'm not back in 15, seal the door." "I will not." "Seal the door, Overseer. That's not a request. The rest of the station is more important than one compartment." He did not wait for her answer. He turned and went back through the blast door, and behind him he heard Thalen say something in untranslated Vrelani that his translator flagged as a prayer form. The interior of Sigma 4 had changed in the 2 minutes he had been in the corridor. The fire had reached the central pipe run, and the insulation was burning in long, dripping sheets that fell from the overhead like molten curtains. The smoke was blacker, denser. His visor's light amplification system activated, painting the world in grainy amber. Temperature readout, 104 degrees, climbing. Hale moved along the port wall, keeping low, using the processing equipment as cover from the radiant heat. The fire was a living thing now, roaring on the starboard side, consuming the mineral slurry processing tanks with a sound like tearing metal. One of the tanks vented, and a gout of superheated fluid sprayed across the module in a horizontal fountain. Hale dropped flat and felt it pass over him, splattering against the wall behind him with a hiss that said the wall's coating was gone. He reached the service corridor at the back of the module. The ladder was intact, bolted to the wall, leading up through a narrow shaft to the observation gallery. The shaft was filled with smoke, but the airflow was upward. The gallery's atmospheric system was pulling air, which meant it was still sealed, still functioning. Hale climbed. The gallery was a long, narrow room with windows that overlooked the refinery floor. The windows were heat-treated and still holding, but the view through them was a solid wall of fire and smoke. The gallery's atmospheric system was cycling, pulling clean air from its own reserve tanks, and the temperature inside was a manageable 40 degrees. 10 Vrelani workers were inside. 6 of them were conscious, pressed against the far wall, as far from the windows as they could get. 4 were on the floor, 2 of them badly burned, 2 unconscious from smoke inhalation they had suffered before reaching the gallery. A Vrelani male with a supervisor's band on his arm, Foreman Seath, Hale would learn later, was kneeling beside one of the burned workers, applying a cooling compress that was clearly inadequate. Seath looked up when Hale came through the hatch. His reaction was not relief. It was something closer to disbelief, so profound it circled back to blankness. "You came," Seath said, "through the fire." "I'm damage control officer Hale. We're evacuating through the main blast door. Can any of them walk?" Seath blinked twice, which the translator flagged as a processing delay, the Vrelani equivalent of a human staring. 6 can walk, 2 are burned, 2 are unconscious. The 6 who can walk go first. Down the service ladder, port wall to the blast door. Stay low, stay along the wall, do not stop. The fire is on the starboard side, but it's spreading. They need to move fast. The port wall, the blast door. Seath repeated it like a man memorizing a route on a map he could not quite see, then something sharpened in his amber face. The blast door was sealed, the system. "I unsealed it." Another blink. "You overrode the containment protocol." "Yes." That is, Seath stopped. In the Vrelani hierarchy, overriding a containment seal was not simply against regulations. It was architecturally unthinkable. The seal existed to sacrifice the part for the whole. It was the foundational logic of every Vrelani structure from their ships to their cities. When a section fails, you amputate it. You do not reach back in. A human had reached back in. "Get the 6 moving," Hale said. "I'll carry the 4. Seeth organized his workers with the efficiency of a man who had just been given a task he understood. 6 Vrelani filed down the service ladder, Seeth counting them off, each one glancing at Hale as they passed him with expressions that his translator could not categorize, but that landed somewhere between awe and vertigo. They descended into the smoke, and Hale heard them moving along the port wall, following the route. Then it was the 4 who could not move, 2 burned, 2 unconscious. Hale assessed them. The burns were severe. Vrelani's skin was translucent and fragile, and the heat had caused deep tissue damage that had turned their amber complexion opaque and dark. They needed a medical facility. They needed it now. "I'll take them one at a time," Hale told Seeth. "You stay with the remaining 3 until I come back." "You will come back." It was not a question about logistics. It was something older and rawer than that. Something that came from a species whose engineering philosophy was built on the premise that what was lost to the fire stayed lost. "I will come back," Hale said. He picked up the first burned worker, a female, her skin gone dark and rigid along her left side, unconscious, breathing in shallow rattles. He carried her down the ladder, across the refinery floor with fire roaring 20 meters to his right, along the port wall through smoke so thick his visor's light amplification was down to 10% visibility, through the blast door where Thalen was waiting with 2 other Vrelani who took the burned worker from his arms and laid her on a makeshift stretcher. Thalen looked at him. "How many more?" 3. He went back in. Second worker, a male, unconscious, lighter than the first. The temperature on the refinery floor was 111 degrees. Hale's suit was screaming warnings at him through haptic pulses in his gloves and collar. The thermal limit was approaching. The fire had reached the central pipe run directly below the observation gallery, and flames were starting to curl up the supports of the gallery itself. The windows would hold for maybe 5 more minutes before the heat cracked them, and then the gallery's atmosphere would vent into the fire, and the gallery would become an oven. Hale moved faster, through the blast door handoff back inside. Third worker, burned, conscious now, whimpering in a high-frequency tone that cut through the translator and hit something primal. Hale picked her up as gently as speed allowed and ran. No more walking. The fire had crossed the central line and was eating into the portside equipment. His route was narrowing. He passed through a gap between 2 burning processing tanks with less than a meter of clearance on either side, the radiant heat turning his suit's outer layer into a crackling, stiffening shell that fought against his movement. Through the door, hand off, Thalen's face was a map of something he did not have the cultural literacy to name. The young Vrelani male from the first group of survivors was standing beside her, staring at Hale with an expression that had gone past shock into a quiet, trembling stillness. "One more," Hale said. "The gallery is on fire," Thalen said. "The cameras, I can see it on the feed. The gallery is burning." Hale looked at the feed on her wrist console. The observation gallery's windows had cracked. Fire was entering from the gap between the lower frame and the glass, a bright tongue of it licking across the gallery floor. Seeth was in there with the last worker, pressed against the far wall, trying to shield the unconscious Vrelani with his own body. "Seal the door behind me in 5 minutes," Hale said. "Not before 5 minutes." He went back in. The refinery floor was a furnace, 119 degrees on the readout, and his suit was at its rated limit. The thermal layer was rigid now, and moving in it was like moving in wet concrete. His rebreather was pulling air through the secondary cartridge, and the filter indicator was amber halfway spent. The smoke was so thick that his visor had switched to infrared overlay, and the world was a landscape of heat signatures. Bright white where the fire burned hottest, deep red where it had not yet reached, and the fading yellow-orange of the service corridor ahead of him. He reached the ladder, climbed. His gloves slipped on the rungs because the metal was hot enough to soften the grip pads. He hauled himself up through the hatch into the gallery, and the heat hit him from a new direction. The fire was inside now, burning along the floor where the cracked window had let it in. Seeth was against the far wall, crouching over the unconscious worker. His supervisor's band melted into the skin of his arm. His amber skin was dark with heat stress, and his eyes were wide and unblinking. "I cannot carry her," Seeth said. "I tried. My arms, I cannot lift her." "I've got her." Hale crossed the gallery in 3 strides, stepping over the burning section of floor, feeling the heat punch through the soles of his boots in a way that told him the boot material had maybe 2 minutes of integrity left. He picked up the unconscious worker, turned. Seeth was behind him, moving on his own, staggering but upright. "Stay with me," Hale said. "Down the ladder, port wall, blast door, same route." "Same route," Seeth echoed. They descended. The ladder's lower rungs were glowing cherry red in infrared, and Hale felt them flex under his weight. He jumped the last 2 meters, landing hard on the refinery floor with the unconscious Vrelani in his arms, and his right knee sent a bolt of pain up his leg that he catalogued and filed away because there was no time for it. The port wall route was almost gone. The fire had consumed the equipment on both sides of what had been a clear path, and the gap was now a corridor of flame 2 meters wide with burning debris falling from the overhead pipe run. Hale could see the blast door at the far end, a rectangle of light in the wall of smoke, 80 meters away. Seeth coughed, a wet, tearing sound that meant his lung membranes were failing. Hale shifted the unconscious worker to one arm, 50 kilograms of dead weight balanced on his left forearm and shoulder, and grabbed Seeth's arm with his right hand. "Move. Don't stop." They moved, through the corridor of flame, through falling debris, through smoke that was so thick it had become a physical substance that pressed against them. Hale's suit was failing, the thermal layer had gone rigid and was starting to crack along the seams, letting heat in through the gaps. His visor was fogging from the temperature differential between his face and the outer surface. His rebreather cartridge indicator went red. He had minutes, maybe less. 60 meters, 50, 40. A section of overhead pipe broke free and fell across their path, a bar of superheated metal that blocked the route. Hale set the unconscious worker down, grabbed the pipe with both hands. The heat went through his gloves and into his palms in a searing, immediate way that he would feel for months afterward, and shoved it aside. Picked the worker back up, grabbed Seeth, kept moving. 30 meters, 20. The blast door was right there, the corridor light spilling through it like water. Thalen was visible, standing at the threshold, her hands on the emergency seal lever, her entire body leaning toward them as if she could pull them through by force of will. 10 meters. Hale's right knee gave out. He stumbled, caught himself, and Seeth's weight dragged them both sideways. Hale braced against the wall was hot, and his hand left a print in the softened surface coating, and pushed off, driving forward through the last few meters with the unconscious worker on his shoulder and Seeth half dragging beside him. They crossed the threshold. Thalen pulled the emergency seal lever. The blast door dropped behind them with a sound like a guillotine, and the fire's roar cut to a muffled, distant thing. Hale set the unconscious worker down on the corridor floor. His hands were shaking, and when he pulled off his gloves, he saw blisters across both palms in the pattern of the pipe he had grabbed. His suit was ruined, cracked, discolored, the thermal layer exposed and brittle. His rebreather was dead, the cartridge spent, and he was breathing station air that tasted like Vrelani atmosphere and chemical residue and survival. Seeth collapsed beside the worker, his chest heaving, his translucent skin so dark it was nearly opaque. A medical team, Vrelani medics who had arrived from the station's central clinic, surrounded them both, scanners active, hands moving with the precise urgency of people doing work they understood. Thalen did not move from the blast door. She stood with her hand still on the lever, looking at Hale, and the expression on her face was something that would later be described in the official report as consistent with profound cognitive disruption. The report's language was clinical. What it meant was that Thalen was watching a man who had done something her species' entire engineering philosophy said could not be done. He had gone back in, 4 times, into a compartment that her species' protocols had written off, and he had brought everyone out. Not some of them, all of them. The station's PA system was still cycling through warnings. Fire in Sigma-4 was now total loss, the module burning uncontrolled behind the sealed door, but the blast door held. The fire would consume Sigma-4 and the module would be vented to space when the pressure finally cracked the hull, and the vacuum would kill the fire and the module would be rebuilt. Standard procedure. What was not standard procedure was what happened next. The alarm tone shifted again. Not the 3-tone cascade of a spreading fire, this was something lower, more sustained, a vibration that Hale felt in his teeth before his translator parsed the alert. Structural compromise, Sigma, ring progressive failure in adjacent modules. The fire in Sigma-4 had heated the structural members that connected it to the adjacent modules. Sigma-3 and Sigma-5 were showing thermal stress fractures in their shared bulkheads. The heat was conducting through the station's frame, weakening the joints, and the station's structural monitoring system was predicting a cascading failure that would compromise the entire Sigma ring within 2 hours. Hale looked at the schematic on Thalen's wrist console. The Sigma ring was 8 modules arranged in a circle around the station's central core. Sigma-4 was gone. Sigma-3 and Sigma-5 were adjacent. If they failed, Sigma-2 and Sigma-6 would be next. The cascade would eat the ring in both directions until the whole structure separated from the core. 600 Vrelani workers lived and worked in the Sigma ring. "Overseer," Hale said, "how many people are in the Sigma ring right now?" Thalen checked her console. Her hands had stopped shaking, and Hale recognized the shift. She had moved past the immediate crisis into the longer crisis, the one where training kicked in and the body stopped asking permission to be afraid. 582, including the workers we evacuated from Sigma-4. The ring is on standard shift rotation. Can you evacuate all 600 to the central core? The evacuation corridors from each module to the core are designed for 50 people. It would take multiple cycles. How long? At standard evacuation speed, 40 minutes per module, 8 modules cycling through shared corridors, she calculated. 3 hours minimum. We might have 2. Thalen looked at him. Then she looked at the schematic, at the red zone spreading through the Sigma ring structural display like a slow bruise. What do you propose? We don't evacuate module by module. We open all the blast doors in the ring simultaneously, clear the interior corridors, and run everyone toward the core at the same time. Every module, every corridor, every person moving in one direction. That violates every evacuation protocol the station has. Your evacuation protocols are designed to sacrifice modules, not save people. Hale said it without accusation, without judgment. It was a fact, stated flat. The Vrelani designed their stations the way they designed everything. The system survives. The parts are replaceable. I'm suggesting we save the people first and worry about the modules after. Thalen was quiet for 4 seconds. 4 seconds of a Vrelani overseer looking at a human damage control officer who had just walked into a burning compartment 4 times because he did not accept the engineering principle that sealed doors stayed sealed. 4 seconds of a species recalibrating. I will authorize it, she said, but the blast door overrides. I cannot do them from here. Each module's doors have independent lockout systems. They must be overridden locally. Then I'll do them. All 7 remaining modules. I'll start with Sigma-3 and Sigma-5. They're the most at risk. Then work outward. Thalen gave him a look that his cultural training could not fully decode, but that he interpreted as something between admiration and the particular kind of fear you feel when you watch someone do something you know is going to cost them. "I will coordinate from here. Station comms, all hands channel." "Good, tell everyone. When the doors open, move toward the core. No stopping, no going back for belongings, no waiting for the next cycle. Continuous flow." Hale reloaded his rebreather with his last cartridge, flexed his blistered hands inside fresh gloves that stung when they touched the raw skin, and moved. Sigma-3 was adjacent to the burning module, and the thermal stress was already showing. The bulkhead between Sigma-3 and Sigma-4 was radiating heat that Hale could feel from 15 meters away, and the blast door to Sigma-3's evacuation corridor was sealed the same containment protocol, the same logic. The system had identified a thermal risk and locked the module down. Hale opened the access panel and started cutting. Inside Sigma-3, the atmosphere was hot but breathable. The workers, 87 of them, mostly mineral processing technicians, were clustered near the module's inner corridor, pressed against the door that connected to the central core's evacuation route. They had been trying to call for an override. Nobody had answered, because the station's communication system was overwhelmed by the cascading alarms from Sigma-4. "The door is open," Hale said when the blast door rose behind him. "Move to the core. Stay in the corridors, don't stop." They moved, 87 Vrelani workers filing past him, some of them pausing to stare a human, here, now, doing something that the system was supposed to prevent, and then moving on because the heat behind them was the more immediate argument. Sigma-5 was next. Same protocol, same override. This module's blast door was harder to crack. The thermal stress had expanded the door frame slightly, and the relay nodes were seated tighter. Hale's multi-tool slipped on the second node and opened a cut across his index finger that bled freely inside his glove. He wiped the blood on his suit leg and kept working. Thalen's voice came through his earpiece, calm but tight. "Sigma-3's outer bulkhead temperature is climbing faster than the model predicted. You have less time than we thought." "How much less?" "The structural team is saying 90 minutes to ring separation, not 2 hours. The fire in Sigma-4 is burning hotter than the original assessment." Hale cut the third node and felt the door mechanism engage. "Then I move faster." 63 workers in Sigma-5. They were calmer than the Sigma-3 group, or perhaps more resigned. They had heard the PA announcements, heard Thalen's all-hands directive, and most of them were already standing near the corridor with whatever they could carry. An elderly Vrelani female with the rank insignia of a senior process engineer stood apart from the group, watching Hale override the door with an expression that he would remember for the rest of his career. It was the look of someone watching a fundamental assumption come apart. "Your species does this?" she asked as she passed him. "Does what?" "Opens the doors." The question hung in the air between them for a moment. Hale did not have an answer for it, or rather, the answer was so basic to him that it did not feel like it needed saying. He said nothing and moved to Sigma-6. The corridor between Sigma-5 and Sigma-6 was the first place he felt the station shudder. Not a vibration from the fire or the alarms, this was structural. A deep, grinding tremor that traveled through the deck plates and up through his boots and into his bones. The station's frame was beginning to shift. Somewhere behind him, in the direction of the burning module, metal was bending past its yield point. Thalen's voice again. "Sigma-3's portside structural beam has failed. The module is beginning to deform. Time to separation is now approximately 70 minutes. Hale ran. The pattern held. Module by module, door by door, Hale worked his way around the Sigma ring. Each override took between 3 and 5 minutes depending on the door's condition and the state of the relay nodes. Some were clean cuts. Others required him to physically pry the access panels open because heat warping had jammed them. His hands were a mess of blisters, cuts, and raw skin inside gloves that were soaked with sweat and blood. His rebreather was on its last margins. His knee, the one he had landed on after the jump from the observation gallery ladder, was swelling inside his boot, and each step sent a bright, sharp report up through his hip. He kept moving. Sigma 6 was a maintenance and fabrication module, and its 91 workers included a welding team that had been in the middle of a repair shift when the alarms hit. The team leader, a broad-shouldered Vrelani male with heavy tool calluses on all 10 fingers, watched Hale crack the access panel with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this 6 times in the last hour. "The system locked us in," the team leader said. Not an accusation, a statement of fact delivered with the weary acceptance of a worker who had been locked in before. "The system doesn't get a vote today," Hale said. The second relay node cracked and the blast door shuttered. "Move your team to the core. Double time." The team leader paused. "Your hands are bleeding." "I know." The Vrelani looked at Hale's gloves, where the dark stains had soaked through the material at every finger joint and across both palms. Then he turned and organized his team with 2 sharp whistles and a hand signal, and 91 workers moved. Sigma 2 held 74 workers, mostly administrative and logistics personnel. The module was the farthest from the fire on one side of the ring, and the temperature was still normal. The workers here had not felt the heat, only heard the alarms. Some of them questioned the evacuation. A logistics coordinator with meticulous grooming and a spotless uniform stepped in front of Hale as the others filed past. "Is this truly necessary? The structural models show this module is well within safety margins." "The structural models are wrong," Hale said. "They were wrong about Sigma 3 by 30 minutes. Move." The coordinator moved. Sigma 7 was the ring's secondary power distribution center, and its 112 workers included a full engineering team responsible for the power grid that kept the Sigma ring's atmospheric systems running. The chief engineer, a Vrelani female named Overseer Kelani, who Hale would later learn had been on Cathara 7 longer than anyone else alive, met him at the blast door before he even finished the override. "I heard your comms with Thalen," Kelani said. "I have been monitoring the structural cascade. Your assessment is correct. The ring will separate, but if we lose the power grid before the evacuation is complete, the core's atmospheric transfer system will not be able to process the influx of 600 additional breathers." Hale looked at her. "What do you need?" 3 minutes at the distribution panel to set a timed power transfer to the core's backup grid. After that, the ring can lose power and the core will sustain. "Do it 3 minutes, not 4. Kelani did it in 2.5. She worked with the economical precision of an engineer who had spent decades learning every conduit and junction in her station, her long fingers dancing across the panel with a speed that belied the trembling in her wrists. When she finished, she pulled her hands away and looked at Hale. "Done, the core will hold. Then get your people moving." 112 workers filed through the corridor toward the core, and Kelani was the last one through. She stopped beside Hale and placed her hand on the bulkhead, feeling the vibration that was now constant, a low-frequency hum that said the station's bones were coming apart. "The ring has maybe 40 minutes, she said, perhaps less. Then we'd better hurry." Each time the same sequence. Access panel, relay nodes, override, door rises, workers pour through, move to core. Each time the same looks from the Vrelani, not hostility, not fear of him, but a kind of cognitive vertigo, as if the ground rules they had built their lives on were shifting under their feet. By the time he reached Sigma 8, the last module in the ring, his body was operating on something beyond normal endurance. His suit was a ruin. His gloves were torn at the fingertips. The blisters on his palms had broken and reformed and broken again. His rebreather was cycling its last filtered air, and the taste of it was the stale, metallic flavor of an exhausted cartridge. His knee had stopped sending pain signals, which was worse, because it meant the joint was swelling past the point where the nerves could compress. Sigma 8 was the station's habitation module for the Sigma Ring quarters, mess halls, recreation facilities. 153 workers and family members were inside, including 12 Vrelani children. The blast door here was different. Newer construction, better seals, more relay nodes. 6 lockout layers instead of 3. Hale opened the panel and looked at the array of crystalline relay nodes and felt, for the first time since the first alarm tone, something that was not adrenaline or determination. It was exhaustion. It was his body telling him, with the flat honesty of a system reaching its limits, that he was running out. He started cutting. First node, second, third. His multi-tool's cutting edge was dull now, worn down by 7 modules worth of crystalline relay nodes, and each cut took longer. Fourth node. The panel sparked, and a jolt of current ran up his multi-tool and into his hand, and the pain that shot through his blistered palm was so immediate and so bright that his vision whited out for a full second. He blinked it back, 5th node. His hand was shaking badly enough that the cut was ragged, but it was a cut. The node split. 6th node. Last one. He set the multi-tool's blade against the crystal, applied pressure, and the blade snapped. The broken tip of his multi-tool's cutting edge fell to the deck with a tiny, bright clink that was audible because, for a moment, every other sound in the station seemed to pause. Hale stared at the broken tool in his hand. Then he looked at the last relay node, a crystalline cylinder the diameter of his thumb, seated in a housing that required a precise cut to break the lockout circuit. His multi-tool was gone. He had no backup. The toolkit he carried had screwdrivers, pry bars, and patch material, but nothing with a fine cutting edge. He pulled his glove off his right hand. The skin underneath was a topography of blisters, burns, and blood. He gripped the relay node between his thumb and the heel of his palm, and he twisted. Vrelani crystalline relay nodes were designed to resist vibration, thermal shock, and mechanical stress. They were not designed to resist 100 kilograms of applied torque from a hand that had already pushed past every reasonable limit. The node cracked. Then it shattered and the shards bit into his palm, and the door's lockout circuit broke, and the blast door began to rise. Behind it, 153 Vrelani looked out at him. Families, workers, children clinging to their parents' legs, an infant in a carrier on a young female's chest, its translucent skin so thin he could see its tiny heart beating. "Move to the core," Hale said. His voice sounded strange in his own ears, rough, stripped down to the consonants, as if his body was budgeting even the energy it took to speak. "Follow the corridor markings. Don't stop." They moved. A Vrelani male carrying a child stopped beside Hale and looked at his hands, both of them now bare, both of them ruined, bleeding freely, crystal shards embedded in the right palm. The male said something in untranslated Vrelani. The translator flagged it as a debt acknowledgement phrase with religious connotations. Then he moved on. Hale leaned against the wall and watched the last of them file past. His job was not done. The evacuation corridors needed to be monitored, the flow directed, the stragglers collected. But for 10 seconds he stood there with his back against the wall and his ruined hands hanging at his sides, and allowed himself to breathe. Thalen found him there. She came down the corridor at a pace that was almost a run, 2 Vrelani medics behind her carrying a field kit. She stopped in front of him and looked at his hands, and the dark blue-purple cycling of her translucent skin told him everything her words did not. 582, she said. "All accounted for. The core is receiving them now." "Good." "The structural cascade is advancing. Sigma 3's outer hull is beginning to buckle. We have perhaps 90 minutes before the ring separates. Then we need to start shutting down the ring's power feeds, to prevent a secondary explosion when the structure goes. You should go to medical. After the power feeds. Thalen looked at him the way Seath had looked at him in the burning gallery, the way the elderly process engineer had looked at him in Sigma 5, the way the father with the child had looked at his hands. It was the expression of a species confronting something that did not fit inside any category they had built. Your species, she said. You do not accept the loss of a compartment. No. Even when the system designates it as acceptable attrition. There's no such thing as acceptable attrition when there are people behind the door. Thalen was quiet for a moment. The medics were wrapping his hands sterile gel, bioplastic sheaths, pressure bandages that were designed for Vrelani tissue and did not fit perfectly but worked well enough. The pain was manageable, which was the only metric that mattered. I have been an overseer for 14 years, Thalen said. I have lost 3 compartments in that time. Each time the doors sealed. Each time I followed the protocol. I checked the atmospheric readings, confirmed the module was non-survivable, and filed the report. The dead were listed as tolerable attrition. Hale said nothing. 17 people in the first compartment I lost, 23 in the second, 9 in the third, 49 total. I knew their names. I filed the reports. I did not override the doors. She paused. I did not know you could override the doors. It's not complicated. The circuit is the same in every module. That is not what I meant. He understood what she meant. The circuit was simple. The decision to break it was the hard part. Not technically hard, a multi-tool in 60 seconds. Hard in the way that required you to look at a system that had decided a compartment was expendable and say, no, not this one, not any of them. The Vrelani did not think that way. Their engineering was brilliant and ruthless and self-sacrificing, in a way that made perfect logical sense if you accepted the premise that the whole was more important than the part. It was a premise that had built them an interstellar industrial network, a fleet of processing stations, a civilization that ran with clockwork efficiency. It was also a premise that had killed 49 people behind sealed doors while Thalen filed reports. Hale helped shut down the Sigma ring's power feeds. It was slow, careful work, made slower by his wrapped hands and stiffening knee. But he knew power systems and Thalen knew the station's layout, and between them they isolated every feed in 90 minutes. The ring separated from the core 70 minutes after that, the structural members giving way in a sequence of groans and snaps that the people in the core felt as a series of vibrations through the floor. The Sigma ring drifted away, a burning, broken halo of 8 modules, and the station's remaining rings Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta held. The power transfer Kelani had set up held. The core's backup grid absorbed the load, and 600 breathers' worth of atmospheric demand settled into the system with a margin that would have been comfortable under any other circumstance. Under this one, it was barely enough. Hale spent the last 30 minutes of the Sigma ring's existence in the core's emergency coordination center, helping Thalen manage the flow of evacuees into temporary quarters. His contribution was limited, his hands were wrapped. His knee was locked in a makeshift brace that a Vrelani medic had fashioned from splint material, and he was running on the kind of depleted reserves that made every decision feel like it was being processed through heavy liquid. But he stood at the intake desk and directed traffic, because standing still was not something he knew how to do while there was work left. The ring separated at the 58-minute mark, 12 minutes ahead of Kelani's revised estimate. The sound it made was unlike anything Hale had heard before, not an explosion, not a crash, but a vast, slow tearing like fabric being ripped at a geological scale. The station shuddered. The lights in the core flickered once, twice, then steadied. Through the viewports, the Sigma ring drifted away in sections, its structural members pulling apart in slow motion, the burning remnants of Sigma 4 still glowing orange at the center of the wreckage like the coal of a dying fire. 600 Vrelani watched it go. Most of them watched in silence. A Terran emergency response cutter arrived 19 hours later, responding to the distress signal that Cathara 7 had finally broadcast after the structural separation. It was a small ship crew of 40, standard SAR configuration, and its captain, a compact woman named Commander Lita Vasquez, docked at the station's Alpha Ring and began a standard assessment. She found 582 Vrelani evacuees from the Sigma Ring, all alive, housed in the Alpha Ring's overflow quarters. She found a destroyed Sigma Ring floating 6 kilometers off the station's axis, burned out and venting to space. She found a Vrelani station crew that had reorganized itself with quiet efficiency, redistributing quarters, rationing atmospheric capacity, keeping the remaining 4 rings operational. And she found a human damage control officer in the station's medical bay with second-degree burns on both hands, a torn meniscus in his right knee, and mild thermal exposure across 60% of his body surface area. Vasquez read the station's incident log. Then she read it again. Then she sat down in the medical bay's visitor's chair and read it a third time slowly, making notes on her tablet in the margins. "You overrode 8 blast doors," she said to Hale. She was standing at the foot of his medical cot, the incident report on her tablet, and her voice had the particular flatness of a naval officer processing something that would require a very specific kind of report. 7, Hale corrected. Sigma 4 was already open. I opened it first, before the cascade. You walked into a burning refinery module 4 times to carry out unconscious workers. Yes, ma'am. Then you proceeded to override 7 additional blast doors around the ring, against the station's containment protocol, and evacuated the entire Sigma Ring population to the core. The containment protocol would have cost them their evacuation routes. The cascade was going to take the ring regardless. Sealing the doors just meant they'd be sealed inside when it went. Vasquez looked at him for a long moment. You know I have to write this up. Yes, ma'am. The Vrelani Station Authority has already filed a preliminary report. They're calling it an unauthorized override of safety systems. I'm aware. They're also calling it the reason 582 people are alive. Vasquez paused. The overseer Thalen, she submitted a supplemental statement. Do you know what it says? No, ma'am. It says that in 14 years of operating under the Vrelani compartmental attrition protocol, she has never seen a species reject the premise of acceptable loss. She says the human did not debate it. He did not calculate it. He opened the doors. Hale said nothing. His hands under the bandages pulsed with a steady, deep ache that matched his heartbeat. She's recommending that the Vrelani Industrial Authority review the compartmental attrition protocol, Vasquez said, across all stations. All sectors. That's a big change. She seems to think it's overdue. Vasquez set the tablet down. I'm going to write this as a standard damage control action under Terran emergency procedures. By the book authority for a DC officer to preserve life in an Allied station emergency. It won't be flashy. It won't be dramatic. I don't need it to be dramatic, ma'am. No, you need it to be accurate. She looked at his hands. Medical says you'll have full mobility back in 6 weeks. The meniscus will take longer. Copy. Vasquez left. Hale lay on the medical cot and stared at the ceiling of a Vrelani medical bay that smelled like copper-based antiseptic and processed air, and something that might have been the lingering trace of mineral slurry smoke. Through the small viewport beside his cot, he could see the wreckage of the Sigma Ring turning slowly in the light of the system star, 8 modules burned out and broken, trailing debris. Seath came to see him on the 2nd day. The foreman's arm, where his supervisor's band had melted into his skin, was wrapped in regenerative film. He sat on the chair beside Hale's cot and did not speak for 90 seconds. I have supervised Refinery Module Sigma 4 for 11 years, Seath said finally. 3 times in those years we have had fire events that triggered the containment seal. Each time the protocol worked as designed. The module sealed. The fire burned out. The damage was repaired. He paused. Workers died in 2 of those events, for the first time, 2 the second. They were behind the doors when they sealed. I'm sorry. I filed the reports. I listed the names. I used the phrase tolerable attrition because it is the phrase the protocol requires. Seath looked at his own hands, 5-fingered, longer than human hands, translucent amber, unburned. I did not try to open the doors. It did not occur to me that opening the doors was something a person could choose to do. It's always a choice. Yes, Seath's voice was very quiet. I think that is what I did not understand. I thought it was architecture. I thought the doors sealed because that was the nature of doors. I did not understand that someone had decided they should seal and that someone else could decide they should not. He sat there for another minute, then stood and walked out. At the door of the medical bay, he stopped. You came back, he said. Each time you came back. Hale looked at him from the cot. That's the job. No, Seath said, that is the species. He left. Hale lay there and listened to the sounds of a Vrelani station putting itself back together, the hum of atmospheric recyclers running at capacity, the click of medics' instruments, the distant murmur of 600 displaced workers settling into temporary quarters and beginning the long work of rebuilding what the fire had taken. Normal sounds, functional sounds, the sounds of a system doing what systems do. Except something in the system had changed. He could hear it in the way the medics talked to each other, not about protocols and procedures, but about the people in the beds. He could see it in the way Thalen moved through the medical bay on her inspection rounds, stopping at each cot, checking each patient not as a status number but as a name she had learned. It was subtle, and Hale did not flatter himself that he had caused it. But something had shifted in the way this station's people looked at their own walls and doors and protocols. Something had cracked open, the way a relay node cracks when you apply enough pressure, and what came through the gap was a question that the Vrelani had never thought to ask. What if the doors could open? Thalen's supplemental statement went through 3 revisions before it was submitted to the Vrelani Industrial Authority's Central Review Board. The final version was 11 pages long. It detailed, with the precision of an engineer who had spent her career measuring tolerances and failure thresholds, exactly what Hale had done every override, every trip into the fire, every worker carried out, every door opened. It included thermal readings, atmospheric data, structural analysis, and a timeline accurate to the second. But the part that the review board cited when they opened the formal review of the compartmental attrition protocol was a single paragraph near the end. It read, "The Human Damage Control Officer operated under a premise that the Vrelani Industrial Authority has never formally adopted, that no compartment containing living personnel may be designated as acceptable loss, while intervention remains physically possible. This premise is not present in our engineering manuals. It is not present in our training curriculum. It is not present in our emergency protocols. After observing its application on Cathara 7, I submit that its absence from our systems represents the single most significant design failure in the history of Vrelani industrial architecture." The review board's proceedings took 6 months. They resulted in a new protocol designation, Emergency Personnel Recovery Override, Classification Tertiary, that authorized station overseers to unseal containment doors when rescue was feasible. It applied to all Vrelani stations, all sectors, all industrial classifications. The protocol was nicknamed, informally and among the workers who had been in the Sigma ring that day, the Hale Override. Hale never learned that. He had transferred to a different station by then, another assignment in a long career of postings to places where things broke and someone had to fix them. He did the work. He filed the reports. He maintained his tools and kept his certifications current and responded to alarms with the flat, procedural efficiency of a man who had decided, at some point he could not precisely name, that doors were for opening. The blisters on his hands healed. The scars did not. He did not mind the scars. They reminded him of the weight of the work, which was the weight of a Vrelani worker carried through a burning corridor, which was the weight of a choice made 8 times in a row with no audience and no medal, and no one watching except the people he was carrying. 582 people, every single one of them. The doors had sealed. He opened them.